The first attack. The Zarkonian armada arrived in Earth's orbit like a storm of metal. Their fleet stretched across the sky, blocking out the sun in some parts of the world. Their warships were enormous, black and silver, covered in glowing red energy lines, humming with raw power. The Zarkonians had conquered over 1,000 planets, crushing countless civilizations. To them, Earth was just another weak target, another world to burn and rule. Inside the command ship, Supreme Commander Xalzor stood tall. His deep purple skin shimmered under the control room's lights, his 6 fingers twitching as he watched the blue planet below. He sneered. "These humans don't even have space defenses," he muttered, shaking his head. "This will be over in minutes." He turned to his second-in-command, General Vrak. "Begin the attack." Vrak nodded sharply and tapped a glowing panel. All across the fleet, weapons powered up. Massive cannons turned toward Earth, locking onto major cities: New York, London, Tokyo, Beijing, and Moscow. Zarkonian soldiers laughed as they watched the targeting screens. They had done this many times before. The humans would have no chance. "Let them feel the power of the Empire," Xalzor declared. The first wave of plasma beams launched from the fleet. Blue fire streaked across the sky, cutting through space like spears of pure energy. The beams were fast, moving at nearly the speed of light, and unstoppable. Cities would burn. Skyscrapers would fall. Millions would scream. But something happened. Something impossible. The plasma beams never reached Earth. They disappeared mid-air, vanishing without a trace. The command center fell silent. Xalzor's eyes narrowed. He looked at the control screens. The data showed that the weapons had fired successfully, yet there was no impact. "What happened?" he demanded. Confused murmurs filled the room. Vrak frantically checked the targeting systems. "Commander, all shots were fired at full power, but they just vanished." Vanished. Xalzor's voice was sharp. "That's impossible. Fire again." More plasma beams were launched, a second wave, then a third. But the same thing happened. Nothing reached the ground. The weapons were firing, but Earth refused to be hit. Panic spread through the fleet. The Zarkonians were warlords, used to destroying worlds, but this had never happened before. Xalzor clenched his jaw. "It must be a human defense system," he growled. "Find it and destroy it." Vrak worked fast, scanning the planet with the ship's sensors. But something was wrong. The data didn't make sense. "Commander, He hesitated, staring at the screen. "Speak," Xalzor barked. Vrak swallowed. "Sir, Earth has no shields, no planetary defenses, no energy barriers. There is nothing stopping our weapons." A chill spread through the room. If there was no shield, then what was happening? Xalzor felt an uneasy weight in his chest. He refused to believe this. "Impossible," he muttered. And then, the fleet's communication system crashed. Screens flickered. Control panels shut down. A loud static noise filled the air. The Zarkonians looked at each other. This was not normal. "Sir, we're being jammed." Vrak shouted. "By who?" Xalzor demanded. No one answered. Then a voice, calm, quiet, but terrifying, echoed through the entire fleet. A human voice. "You made a mistake." The words were soft, but they carried a weight that made every Zarkonian freeze. Xalzor's throat tightened. This was impossible. No human ship had approached. No signals had been detected. Yet the voice was here, inside every Zarkonian ship. The crew felt an unfamiliar sensation, something they had never known before. Fear. Xalzor forced himself to remain calm. He slammed his fist against the control panel. "I don't care what trick they're using," he roared. "Target Earth's surface with the doomsday cannon. I want that planet turned into dust." Vrak hesitated. "Do it," Xalzor shouted. The Doomsday Cannon was the Zarkonian Empire's most powerful weapon. It could erase entire planets in a single blast. The cannon's energy began charging. But then, every single ship in the fleet shut down at the same time. The lights flickered off. The control panels went dark. The massive warships, once full of energy, became silent, lifeless metal floating in space. Zalzur's breath caught in his throat. He looked outside. Half of his entire fleet was now dead in space. No weapons, no shields, no power. The human voice returned. "Leave now." Zalzur's heart pounded in his chest. This couldn't be happening. Earth wasn't fighting back with missiles. They weren't using energy shields. They had shut down his entire fleet without firing a single shot. This was not a battle. It was a warning. A final warning. And for the first time in his life, Supreme Commander Zalzur understood something terrifying. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was something else entirely. And they had just made the worst mistake in the history of their empire. Humanity's counterattack. The Zarkonian fleet floated in silence. Massive warships, once symbols of unstoppable power, now nothing more than lifeless husks drifting in orbit. Inside the command ship, Supreme Commander Zalzur gripped the edge of his control panel. Sweat dripped down his temples, though his species rarely perspired. His breathing was heavy, his chest rising and falling in short, panicked bursts. "Status report," he barked. No one answered. His crew sat frozen, their screens dead, their controls unresponsive. They had never faced anything like this before. Across the fleet, thousands of Zarkonian soldiers pounded their consoles, desperately trying to restore power. But the ships weren't damaged. They were disabled, as if something had ripped the life from their technology. "Impossible," Vrak whispered. His voice trembled. Zalzur turned sharply. "What did you say?" Vrak gulped, staring at his dead screen. "Sir, this is not possible. It's as if our ships don't exist anymore." Zalzur growled. "That is ridiculous. We are sitting in them." But deep down, he felt the same fear creeping into his mind. This was beyond anything they had ever encountered. And then, a single small ship rose from Earth's surface. Zalzur's eyes locked onto it instantly. It was unlike any human vessel he had seen before. Sleek, black, and without any visible weapons. It moved without thrusters, without exhaust, like a shadow gliding through space. "One ship," Vrak said in disbelief. "They send one ship." The Zarkonian soldiers laughed nervously. The fear that had gripped them for the last few moments began to fade. "They think one ship can challenge the Empire," one of the officers sneered. Zalzur felt a flicker of confidence return. Yes, this was their enemy. This was a mistake on Earth's part. "Target it with our remaining operational weapons," he ordered. Vrak hesitated. "Do it." The last few functional cannons in the fleet powered up, a handful of plasma turrets, all aimed at the single approaching human ship. They fired. The human ship didn't move. And yet, the energy beams never reached it. Like before, the blasts simply vanished mid-space. The laughter in the Zarkonian command center died instantly. Then, before Zalzur could process what was happening, the black ship released a pulse. It was silent, invisible, and yet, an entire section of the Zarkonian fleet disintegrated in an instant. Not exploded, not destroyed, just erased. One moment, the ships were there. The next, they were gone, as if they had never existed. The command center erupted into pure chaos. "Dulu, what was that?" "Sensors can't detect it." Half the fleet just vanished. Zalzur stared, frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just seen. Then, the black ship moved. Not fast, not slow, just deliberate, and it was heading straight for them. Vrak stepped back from his station. He turned to Zalzur, and for the first time in all their years of war, Salzor saw fear in his second-in-command's eyes. "Commander," Vrock's voice was hollow. "We need to leave." Salzor snapped out of his shock. "We can't. We." But his words died in his throat, because at that moment, the human ship spoke. Not through sound, not through radio waves, but directly into their minds. The voice was calm, controlled, and terrifyingly human. "You don't belong here." Salzor felt his body tremble, though he had never once known fear in his entire life. And then, the command ship's walls began to fade. Not crack, not break. Just fade into nothingness. Crew members screamed as their consoles, their seats, their very armor started dissolving into dust. Salzor's heartbeat thundered in his chest. This isn't war, he realized. This is execution. And Earth had decided their fate. The fear spreads. The Zarkonian command ship was dying, but not in the way Supreme Commander Salzor had ever witnessed before. The walls faded into nothingness. The floor dissolved like mist. The crew screamed as their own bodies flickered, their very existence unraveling. Salzor clutched the command panel, but it was vanishing beneath his hands. His warriors, his empire's strongest soldiers, were crying out in horror, grasping at the air as their bodies dissipated into dust. Not burned, not torn apart, just erased. And through it all, the human ship hovered silently in space. It had fired no missiles. It had launched no visible attack. Yet the Zarkonian fleet was dying. Salzor felt something he had never felt before. Terror. His mind screamed at him to move, to do something, but his own body refused to obey. His limbs felt heavy, as if the very fabric of his being was breaking apart. This is not how war works, his mind roared. This is not how we die. He turned to Vrock, his second-in-command, but the general was gone. There was no body, no blood, just empty space where he had once stood. Salzor's hands shook violently. The Empire had never lost a battle. Now, they were losing to an enemy that wasn't even fighting back. Across the fleet, in the remaining Zarkonian ships, chaos erupted. Soldiers shouted. Engineers scrambled to restart their systems, but nothing worked. The warships floated, powerless, unable to fire, unable to move. And one by one, they began disappearing. Ship after ship blinked out of existence, as if the universe itself had erased them from reality. Aboard the last functional warship, Admiral Velthak pounded his fists against the dead control panel. "Send a distress call to the Empire. Now," he ordered. The communications officer stared at him in horror. "Sir, we can't." Velthak grabbed the officer by his armor. "Why not?" The officer's voice was barely a whisper. "Because the signal never leaves the ship. It just vanishes." Velthak felt cold. His kind had fought hundreds of civilizations, some strong, some weak, but none had ever blocked their communication entirely. Somehow, Earth had isolated them. The entire fleet was trapped. No distress call, no escape. And then, the human voice returned, echoing through every ship, every mind. "You were warned." Velthak's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just an enemy defending their home. This was something else entirely. He turned to his officers, his voice shaking. "Prepare an emergency retreat. We must warn the Empire." Back on the command ship, Salzor clenched his teeth, forcing his body to move. His vision was blurry, his limbs barely responding, but he stumbled toward the emergency override. If he could manually activate the escape pods, he might still. Then he felt it. A presence. Something watching him. Slowly, he turned his head, and there, standing inside his own warship, was a human. It wasn't in armor. It wasn't holding a weapon. It was just a man, dressed in simple black, calm, expressionless. Yet Salzor's entire body froze in pure terror. The human took a single step forward. His voice was soft, Yet it rang through the empty halls like thunder. You don't understand what you've awakened. Zalzur's breath was ragged. Who? What are you? Asterisk, asterisk. The human tilted his head slightly. Then he raised his hand. Zalzur braced himself for pain, for death. But nothing happened. Instead, the universe around him shifted. He was no longer on his ship. He was somewhere else. Somewhere vast, endless. Darkness surrounded him. Stars flickered in the void. And then he saw them. Humans, but not just one. An infinite number, stretching across space and time, their eyes glowing like stars, their presence heavier than gravity itself. Zalzur trembled violently. This was no ordinary species. This was something ancient, something beyond his comprehension. They had never been conquered, because they had never allowed anyone to try. They had hidden their true power, waiting, watching. And now, the Zarkonian Empire had pushed too far. The human before him spoke one final time. Run. Then, Zalzur was back on his ship. His fleet was gone. Every ship, every soldier, erased. Only his ship remained, drifting in the void. The human ship had vanished, and on the view screen, a single message appeared. Earth is off limits. Zalzur collapsed to his knees, his breath shaking. He had been the strongest warlord in the galaxy. Now he was nothing more than a messenger of doom. His people would ask why he fled. They would ask what could possibly make the Empire retreat, and he would have no words to describe it, because the truth was something no one would believe. Humanity wasn't a species. They were something else entirely. The last survivor. The Zarkonian command ship floated in the void, silent, broken, alone. Supreme Commander Zalzur sat in his chair, his claws digging into the armrests. His breathing was ragged, his heart hammering in his chest. His entire fleet was gone, not destroyed, not defeated, erased. Every ship, every soldier, every last war machine of the greatest empire in the galaxy, wiped from existence. And yet, Earth had left him alive. That terrified him more than anything. He should have died with his fleet. He should have been obliterated alongside his soldiers. But the humans wanted him to live. Why? The message. The bridge of the Zarkonian command ship was deathly quiet. No crew, no officers, no soldiers. Zalzur was the last one left. And then the screen flickered to life. His eyes widened. The ship's systems had been completely dead since the attack. How was it activating now? A human figure appeared on the display. Not in armor. Not holding a weapon. Just a man in black. His eyes glowed faintly, as if reflecting the light of 1,000 stars. The human smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You will take this message to your emperor," the human said, "and you will tell him exactly what happened here." Zalzur's throat was dry. He tried to summon his pride, his warrior's defiance, but the weight of what he had witnessed crushed him. He could only nod. The human's expression never changed. "Tell him that Earth is off limits." Zalzur swallowed hard. "And if we don't?" The human leaned forward. And for the first time, Zalzur saw something in those eyes. Something ancient. Something infinite. Something that should not exist. "Then you won't exist either." And just like that, the screen went black. The return to the Empire. Zalzur's ship was the only one that survived. The instant he tried to activate the hyperdrive, it worked. Earth was letting him go. The journey back to the Zarkonian homeworld was silent. No soldiers to command. No fleet to report to. Just him, the last survivor. When his ship emerged from hyperspace, the entire Zarkonian High Command was waiting. Thousands of warships surrounded the capital planet. The great Emperor Zorvath stood in his throne room, staring at the screen as Zalzur's ship approached. The Zarkonian Empire had conquered 1,000 worlds. They had crushed entire civilizations. They had never known fear. But as Talzor's hollow eyes stared into the transmission feed, they felt it. And when the Emperor spoke, his voice was filled with cold fury. "Where is the fleet?" Zalzor's lips trembled. His claws tightened into fists. How could he explain this? How could he make them understand? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because how do you describe an enemy that didn't fight, but simply erased you from existence? How do you explain that humanity wasn't a species, but something beyond? Something ancient, something unkillable, something that had simply decided. The Zarkonian Empire did not belong in the universe anymore. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "Zalzor, speak." Zalzor took a slow, shaky breath, and then, with all the strength he had left, he said the only thing that mattered. "We can't fight them." A silence unlike anything the Empire had ever known fell over the throne room. For the first time in history, for the first time since their empire was born, the Zarkonians realized they were not the apex predators of the universe. Someone else was, and they had just barely survived their first and only warning. The final decision. Deep in the Emperor's war chamber, the greatest minds of the Zarkonian military gathered. Some wanted war. Some wanted to strike back. But Zalzor sat in silence, staring at the floor. He already knew the truth. There would be no war, because war meant that both sides fought. And what he had seen, Earth never fought. They had simply decided the Zarkonian fleet would no longer exist. And then, it was gone. No explosions, no wreckage, just gone. The Emperor stood. His voice was grim, filled with something no Zarkonian leader had ever known. "Fear. We will never return to Earth," he said at last. "Erase all records of the invasion. We were never there. We never saw them. We never heard of them. And we will never speak of them again. The war is over before it began." The chamber was silent. Then, one by one, the warlords nodded. The Zarkonian Empire, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, had made their decision. They would pretend Earth did not exist, because if they acknowledged it, Earth might acknowledge them back. Epilogue. The Watchers. Far away, on a small blue planet, a man in black stood on the surface of the moon. He watched as Zalzor's ship left the solar system. Behind him, another figure stepped forward. A woman, dressed in the same black attire, her eyes reflecting the light of distant galaxies. "Do you think they understood the warning?" she asked. The man smiled faintly. "Yes." The woman sighed. "And if they don't?" The man looked at the stars, his expression unreadable. "Then we will erase them, like the others." The woman nodded, and together, the two figures, the last remnants of something older than time itself, vanished into the shadows. The ones who watch. Far beyond the Zarkonian Empire, beyond the borders of known space, in the cold abyss of the void rift, something watched. It had no name. It had no form. It had no need for either. It had existed before galaxies spun into motion, before stars first burned, before even time itself was measured. And for countless eons, it had been waiting. Waiting for the moment when one species, just one, would rise above the natural order. Earth had done it. The silent erasure of the Zarkonian fleet was not unnoticed. The destruction was not physical. It was conceptual. The fleet had not been defeated in battle. It had been removed from existence entirely. That was something even the oldest empires, even the void-born horrors that lurked in the dark spaces between galaxies, could not do. Humanity had done it effortlessly. And so, something stirred. For the first time in millennia, the Watchers of the Rift turned their gaze toward Earth. Something had changed. Something was awakening. The sleeper must not wake. On a distant world, far from Earth's domain, a council of beings convened. They were the Ancient Ones, the hidden powers, civilizations that had existed long before the current cycle of the galaxy. They had ruled in secret, They had seen the rise and fall of 1,000 empires, but never before had they feared a species like humanity. A holographic projection showed the final moments of the Zarkonian fleet, the silence, the vanishing, the absence of battle, the absolute and terrifying ease with which Earth had decided who would exist and who would not. The elder speaker, a being older than recorded history, spoke first. "The sleeper is stirring." The other ancients shuddered at the words. Humanity, the sleeper, was something that had been hidden for a long time. But now they were waking up. A second elder, wrapped in robes of shifting energy, whispered, "We agreed long ago that if this ever happened, we would intervene." A third voice, cold and ancient, cut through the chamber. "Then we must act before it is too late. On Earth, the hidden ones speak." Deep beneath the surface of Antarctica, in a city that did not exist on any map, a different council gathered. They were not aliens. They were not invaders. They were humans, but not like the ones on the surface. These were the elders of Earth, the last remnants of an age that had been erased from history. They had lived long before the first pyramids, before the first kings, before humanity even knew itself. They had sealed away their power, hiding it within the collective mind of the species. But now something had changed. One of them, a woman with eyes like the void, spoke first. "They are watching us." The others nodded. For the first time in millions of years, the ancients of the galaxy had turned their gaze toward Earth. Another elder, his voice as old as time, whispered, "We were supposed to remain hidden." The woman turned her gaze skyward. "The Zarkonians forced our hand. Now the others will come." Silence. Then a single voice, calm but heavy with finality. "Then we will show them why they should have left us alone." Elsewhere in the galaxy, the war that never came. On the capital world of the Galactic Senate, the leaders of hundreds of civilizations met in secrecy. The disappearance of the Zarkonian Armada had shaken the foundations of the galaxy itself. For centuries, the Senate had viewed Earth as unimportant, a primitive backwater. But now, they knew the truth. Earth had never been weak. They had simply been waiting. A representative from the Carthari Dominion leaned forward, his voice trembling. "We need to act before they erase another empire." The Senate murmured in agreement. Fear spread like a virus through the chamber. But then, a different voice spoke. A representative from the Arcanist system, a race of scholars and historians, stood slowly. His expression was not one of fear, but understanding. "No," his voice echoed through the hall. "We will do nothing." Angry murmurs filled the chamber. "Nothing. Earth is a threat." The Arcanist delegate nodded. "Yes, and that is precisely why we must leave them alone." The room fell silent. The delegate raised his hand, activating a hologram. It was an ancient record, far older than the Galactic Senate itself. A warning, written in a language long forgotten. The translation appeared before them. "Do inotid wellioaki them." The council stared at the words in horror. The Arcanist delegate sighed. "You think Earth is a new threat?" He turned, looking at each of them. "No. The real truth is far worse." He pointed at the hologram. "We knew about them before." The room froze. The delegate whispered, "And we knew to stay away." Final scene. Earth awakens. On the moon, beneath the shadows of ancient craters, a figure stood, dressed in black, silent, watching. A second figure appeared beside him, her presence like a whisper in the void. "The galaxy is afraid of us," she murmured. The man nodded. "They should be." She turned to him. "Do we erase them?" The man's eyes glowed like stars. He looked at Earth, at the planet that had slept for so long. "No." A pause. Then, in a voice like distant thunder, he whispered, "Not yet." The two figures vanished into the shadows, and far below, on the surface of Earth, humanity dreamed. Dreams of stars, dreams of power, dreams of a past long buried, and a future yet to come. The forgotten truth. The stars trembled. Across the galaxy, whispers spread like wildfire. Earth was awake. The Galactic Senate fell into paralysis, its leaders trapped in fear, debating whether to act or to stay silent and pray that humanity ignored them. The Zarkonian Empire erased its records of the invasion. Their greatest warlords swore never to speak of what had happened. But in the shadows, in places not marked on any star charts, a different kind of meeting was taking place. The Ancient Ones were gathering. The Council of the Forgotten. Deep in the void, between dimensions, where even the most advanced civilizations feared to venture, they met. A great chamber, carved from a planet that no longer existed, was filled with the oldest beings in the universe. They were not allies. They were not enemies. They were the silent watchers, the last remnants of the first civilizations, those who had once ruled the stars before history itself was rewritten. And they knew what was coming. A being of pure shadow, its form shifting between 1,000 alien species, spoke first. They have awakened. A second figure, wrapped in a cloak woven from the fabric of time itself, hissed. The sleeper should have never stirred. A third, its body resembling a living storm, rumbled. We should act now, while we still can. The chamber was filled with a silent fear, because this had happened before. A long time ago, before the first Galactic Empire, before even the birth of the stars themselves, a war had been fought. Not against humanity. No, humanity had not been the enemy. Humanity had been something far worse. They had been the executioners. And now, after so many millennia of peace, after so many eons of silence, they were waking up again. A final voice, soft but carrying the weight of an entire universe, spoke at last. We must decide. The other ancients turned to face him. He had no name. He had no face. But he had seen what humanity could do. He had survived the last war. And he knew what would come next. His eyes burned like dying stars as he whispered, "Do we try to stop them?" The chamber fell silent, because deep down, they already knew the answer. No, they could not stop what was coming. They could only pray that this time, humanity would choose mercy. On Earth, the hidden memories. Beneath the icy wastelands of Antarctica, in a place untouched by time, a door opened. Not a normal door. Not a construct of man, but something older than civilization itself. A woman stepped forward, her black cloak flowing behind her. Her eyes, voids of infinite space, stared at the structure before her. Carved in the ancient stone were symbols that no human should have known. Yet she read them effortlessly, because she had seen them before, because she had been there when they were first written. A voice, deep and familiar, spoke behind her. "Are you sure about this?" She didn't turn. "It's already begun. We cannot stop it now." She lifted her hand, pressing it against the cold surface of the doorway. For thousands of years, it had remained sealed. For thousands of years, Earth had kept its secrets hidden. But now, as the galaxy stared in horror, as ancient beings whispered warnings in the darkness, the locks of reality itself began to break. The past was returning, and humanity would remember who they truly were. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the first mistake. The Galactic Senate had finally made its decision. They would strike first. They could not risk waiting. They could not risk allowing humanity to grow stronger. And so, the largest fleet in galactic history was assembled. Thousands of warships, millions of soldiers, the combined might of over 300 civilizations. They would launch an all-out assault on Earth. "We will burn their planet before they can erase us," one senator roared. The others cheered in agreement. It would be quick. It would be merciless. It would be total. They thought they were prepared. They had studied Earth's defenses. They had analyzed the Zarkonian invasion. They believed that humanity had only scratched the surface of its power. They believed that, if they struck first, they could wipe Earth from existence before Earth did the same to them. But they did not understand, because they had only seen what humanity allowed them to see. The fleet arrives. The greatest armada in history emerged from hyperspace, surrounding Earth on all sides. Every weapon primed, every ship armed. The order was given. Fire. The first wave of energy blasts, nuclear warheads, and antimatter missiles surged toward the blue planet. And then, the entire fleet stopped. Time itself froze. The ships did not move. The weapons did not fire. The soldiers did not breathe. They were caught in a moment of absolute stillness, trapped, suspended. And then, from the surface of Earth, a single figure rose into space. A human. No suit. No armor. Just a man. Just a man. His eyes burned with the light of collapsing galaxies, and as he looked upon the frozen fleet, his voice echoed across the void. "We gave you a chance." He raised a single hand, and every single warship, every soldier, every missile, every atom of metal and flesh was erased. Not destroyed, not defeated. Gone. The largest armada in history vanished in an instant. The galaxy screamed, and humanity finally opened its eyes. Final scene. The end of fear. On the moon, the two figures in black watched in silence. The woman turned to the man. "So it begins again." The man nodded. "Yes, but this time, we won't let them forget." They stood there, watching as the stars trembled. And across the galaxy, in every empire, in every system, in every world, the message was clear. Earth was awake. And now, there was nowhere left to run. The return of the forgotten. The galaxy was silent. For the first time in recorded history, there were no wars, no diplomatic feuds, no border conflicts, because every empire, every species, every ruler now knew one thing: Earth was awake, and the galaxy belonged to them. In the depths of the void, a signal is heard, far beyond the borders of the known universe, in the ruins of a forgotten civilization. Something stirred. It had no name, for names were a concept of the young. It had no shape, for forms were the limitations of the weak. But it remembered. It had seen this before. The rise of Earth, the awakening of the sleepers, the moment when the universe itself had shuddered in fear. It had waited, unseen, in the cold spaces between galaxies, watching. Now, as the echoes of humanity's return rippled through the cosmic fabric, it turned its attention back toward the center of the universe, and it whispered a single thought: "They have returned." For the first time in a billion years, the true war was about to begin. On Earth, the vault is opened. Beneath the ruins of an ancient city, hidden under layers of time and forgotten history, a chamber rumbled to life. The woman in black stood at the entrance. Her eyes, filled with the reflections of galaxies, stared at the enormous doors before her. Carved into the metal was a warning, written in a language that had been lost before the first humans had walked the earth. "Do not open. Tu not mbr. Let them sleep." A man stepped beside her. His expression was calm, but his presence carried the weight of 1,000 forgotten battles. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. She placed her hand on the door. A pulse of pure energy rippled through the underground chamber. The symbols glowed, then burned away into nothingness. The locks disengaged. The doors, sealed for longer than time could record, began to open. And from the depths of the chamber, something awoke. The false gods tremble. In the highest realms of the universe, where ancient beings once ruled as gods, there was a place known only as the Throne of Ascendance. Here, the entities that had shaped the very structure of existence gathered in terror. The most powerful among them, an entity known only as the First Speaker, stood before the Council of Eternity. "The vault has been opened," the First Speaker said. "The other ascendants, beings older than time itself, shook with fear. Impossible, one of them hissed. We locked them away. We erased their memory. Humanity should never have awakened. The first speaker's eyes burned with an emotion he had not felt in eons. And yet, here we are. A holographic projection flickered to life before them, showing a live view of Earth. They saw the vault opening. They saw the figures stepping out. They saw what humanity had buried. And for the first time in countless millennia, the so-called gods of the universe realized the truth. They were never gods. They had never ruled. They had only been allowed to exist. And now, the ones who had permitted their rule were waking up. The battle that will never happen. The remaining galactic empires tried to fight. Even after witnessing the erasure of the greatest fleet in history, some species refused to accept reality. The Exarthal Dominion, a race of war-driven machines, sent an armada of 15 million warships toward Earth, their AI warlords refusing to accept defeat. The Valthi Ascendancy, a species that had ruled half the galaxy with psychic might, attempted to erase humanity's collective mind. The Prime Swarm, an insectoid hive mind that had consumed entire solar systems, began to spread toward human space. They all vanished, not in fire, not in war, not in an explosion of chaos. One moment, they existed. The next, they didn't. No wreckage, no remains, no memories, as if they had never been there at all. The final warning. A transmission was sent, not through technology, not through signals or light. It simply appeared in the minds of every ruler, every leader, every being in the galaxy. A voice, neither male nor female, neither young nor old, but filled with infinite authority, spoke only 3 words: "We are awake." And the galaxy understood. There would be no war. There would be no rebellion. There would be no resistance. There was only one truth. Earth was no longer a planet. It was a law of existence itself. And those who disobeyed reality ceased to exist. Epilogue. The beginning of a new era. On Earth, the 2 figures in black stood atop the highest mountain, staring at the stars. "What now?" the woman asked. The man smiled slightly. "Now, we wait." She frowned. "For what?" He turned to her, his eyes filled with something ancient and unknowable. "For them to remember why they feared us in the first place." As they spoke, far beyond the edges of the universe, something stirred. Something older than the stars. Something that had once ruled. Something that had been waiting, just like them. The real war had not yet begun. But soon, it would. And this time, there would be no mercy.